everyone. This is Kavita Apachu.
And I'm Mike Kendall.
We are the co-hosts of Shift. At Shift, we hope to inspire you to make a difference by learning from top innovation leaders on how they are driving impact around the world. In today's episode, our guest is Jocelyn Mangan, CEO of Him for Her, a social impact venture that is building the boardroom of the future by facilitating the inclusion of women on boards for profit organizations. She will be sharing how she has combined her passion and experience to create a social enterprise with purpose to increase diversity and address the gender gap in boardrooms across the country and the world. And the data tells us that organizations with 30% or more women in leadership positions are 15% more profitable. And currently in the US, 19% of board seats are held by women.
Before we jump in, I'd like to tell you about a special offer from Moves the Needle. For the next week, we will be offering 30 minutes of free innovation coaching to you or anyone on your team. So please go to the link on the screen and sign up. And now I'd like to welcome our guest, Jocelyn Mangan, founder and CEO of Him for Her. Him for Her is a social impact venture aimed at accelerating diversity on corporate boards. They are overcoming the networking gap responsible for the sparsity of women in the boardroom by engaging business luminaries to connect the world's most talented hers to board service. Since its founding in 2018, Him for Her has built a referral-only talent network of over 2,000 board-ready women and delivered free board referral lists to over 300 companies ranging from startups to Fortune 100s. Him for Her creates warm introductions between board candidates and CEOs through its series of small events guest hosted by renowned leaders such as Stacy Brown-Philpot, Reid Hoffman, Brian Moynihan, Jeff Weiner, Eric Yuan, and many more. Him for Her is a 501c3 corporation and provides its services free of charge thanks to generous support from donors and corporate sponsors. Jocelyn herself serves on private and public boards, including ChowNow and Papa John's, and is a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. Jocelyn is a product technology leader with over 20 years experience building iconic global brands for CitySearch, Ticketmaster, OpenTable, and Snagajob, where she focused on what technology could do for the business. As a business leader, entrepreneur, and mother of two, she is an advocate for work and family thriving together. Welcome, Jocelyn. Thanks so much for joining us today on Shift.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited about having you here and learning some of what's going on in your world, as we always like to do. But I'd love to kick us off maybe with just a little bit of a present question about how things have changed for you given the pandemic. Clearly, the work you do, I'm sure, has had to change, as well as all the people that you've been working with. But tell us a little bit about some of those changes and how you've been able to cope and overcome those.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. You know, before March, the primary way that we made warm introductions to with the effort of extending networks was through private dinners. And we did 36 dinners in 12 cities in short of 2 years. And when the crisis hit, we really had to go deep into reminding ourselves what's the purpose. And at the end of the day, the purpose wasn't the room and the food, although we love breaking bread together as humans. The purpose was really to have thoughtful conversation between people who wouldn't have otherwise met, so that we could extend those personal networks, which is where most board members are found. So we brought the conversations online. And what we've been pleasantly surprised by is one, just the scale at which we're able to host those. So, you know, a dinner and flying around and getting people's schedules free is harder than getting people on a virtual conversation. I think the other powerful thing is the geographic barriers that have been broken down. We've had participants from Kansas City and South Carolina, cities that would have maybe not hit our trajectory and our current rate of growth. And so the talent and networking and introductions we've been able to make have really crossed those geographic barriers.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is. you said, as someone who believes in work and family thriving together, and given that the current crisis, those two worlds have meshed together even more. How has that, belief helped you support your family and team during this time of massive uncertainty and stress?
Wow, what a question. We could do a whole podcast on this one. Yes, I believe work and family coexist. Did I ever think they'd coexist under one roof? No. And so I won't lie, it's been incredibly challenging. I think to establish focus and be able to think that you're doing things well. It reminded me a little bit of when I was on maternity leave and I came back to work and I never felt like I was doing any one thing great. And so I think what this has taught us is that, perfect is perfect is the enemy of good. I think that's been a lesson, right? Which is valuing that we have a house, valuing that we can spend this time together have been the pros. I think some of the cons for me is I'm really used to separating my environments. So when I'm at work, I'm at work, and when I'm at home. And it's been quite a challenge for me personally to blend the two under one roof. But I think like all of us, we've also learned how adaptable we are. And what I would say is very much taking it day to day. I imagine for parents, it's very different depending on what age your children are. I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and they really need me. I can't leave them alone in the house. They can't really self-pace through school. So we've had to develop ideas and systems around ourselves so that we can still be able to work and still be able to be parents. And it's been an incredibly challenging time. And I can only imagine the scope of what all parents and by the way, educators and the systems around us are experiencing in this moment.
That is so true. But love the empathy you have for educators as well and other parents too. Your organization, as you alluded to, has an interesting approach to facilitating the elevation of women on boards for for-profit organizations. Can you share that approach with our listeners and more importantly, how you got started?
Sure. So I got started, I'm a Henry Crown Fellow out of the Aspen Institute, and that fellowship tasks its fellows with starting a venture, and Him for Her was my venture. It's now a company, I'm happy to say. It was really born out of my passion for women at work, and yet I also know through my experience as a tech operator that the boardroom is the most powerful room in business. And as I looked at the data, I could clearly see that diversity was an issue. The majority of board members are men. And I also knew through my own personal experience, I had worked exclusively for and with men and to large success in my career. So it made sense that we'd partner with them. I interviewed 90 men to learn more about the space and how they thought. And I learned 2 universal truths that kind of guided our approach, which is one, they all wanted help. They didn't quite know how. And the second was when I asked them how they found the last board member, I got a personal network story. Which really just reinforced the truth, which is that the majority of board seats are found through word of mouth. And so as an organization, our vision is that we transform lives by unlocking the social and economic benefit of a diverse boardroom. The impact of this room in business is profound, not just on the economic success of the company and the shareholders, but also the communities that use the products and services. And we also know it's not a pipeline issue, it's a network gap. And the network gap is caused by people wanting to pick people who they trust or who they have a relationship with, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. The only challenge is that those personal networks often are not diverse. So we help close the network gap. We do it in 4 specific ways. The first is we seed the network and extend the network with warm introductions. We talked a little bit about the dinner series. We've extended that to online conversations. We also provide candidate lists to company CEOs and investors. We do education for everyone in our network, and that includes not just board-ready women, but also CEOs who want to learn more about the value of adding an independent director and other topics like that. And finally, we help with benchmarking. You can't change what you can't measure. So we help specifically a lot with the kind of private company space where those benchmarks may not be yet established.
Wow, so it's a pretty well-rounded set of offerings. How have you facilitated the networking virtually, right? Transitioning it from the face-to-face paradigm to this virtual environment?
So we really applied the same premise, which is bringing a group together. It's a small group, 16 to 22. We always have a notable host. Mike read some of those off at the beginning. We still have those. And we keep the mix gender split 50-50. And we do off the record conversations. So, how did we translate it from the dinner table to online? We just tried it. It's that simple. Like many beta ideas, we said, what's wrong with just trying it? And now, over 20 conversations later online, we've been able to refine, improve, survey our audience. The same way we'd share email addresses after a dinner, we share after the curated conversation. And so I wouldn't say seamless, nothing's seamless, but I have to give credit to our team for just kind of diving in and trying at a time when I'm sure many people running businesses were questioning, how do we do this? And we just kind of put one foot in front of the other, and now we have a new extension of our product.
Oh, that is awesome, right? It's a little bit of, okay, the entrepreneurial spirit. Hey, let's learn by doing. And you've learned a lot, clearly. So is there anything that you'd like to share with our listeners who are down this path in terms of transitioning, from the in-person world to a virtual world?
I think part of it is understanding your audience and understanding what they need, and then trying to create the value and the purpose around those things. So we actually took all of our different kind of constituents in our network. So, women who want to be on boards, well, what are they going through right now? Well, actually, some of them have more time now than they did before. Same kind of goes true on some of the hosts that we work with. We've been able to get on their calendars more easily. We shorten the time, the dinner is 2.5 hours, the online conversation's 1 hour and 15 minutes. But we really have this deep understanding of each of these constituents, of who they are and what constraints they were operating under during this kind of virtual multiple crisis world. Then I think what we did is said, okay, what's the purpose of what we were doing before, and how can we recreate that purpose in this new medium? So I think the purpose part is really important, and also the value. Where are we uniquely positioned to provide value? How can we deliver that value? And I think if you start at those kind of bigger levels, you can get into the tactics of, okay, now it's a Zoom conversation of 1 hour and 15 minutes. But I think you have to start with that kind of customer lens and asking those bigger questions about the people that you're building or working with.
You've mentioned this, your passion has given this social venture purpose, which is, so lucky, because how many people can find, a way to align their passion with something so purposeful? The question I have for you is, as you were working through building your entrepreneurial venture, at what point did you sort of have that belief that there was a there?
What a great question. I'm a first-time entrepreneur, so to the audience, I've been an operator for over 20 years, and so first walked down this path. I'd be curious to hear what other entrepreneurs say. There was a moment, so I did start this as a project, and there was kind of that moment that you alluded to, and I wish I could say, I looked at this bird that flew by or something, very signature, but I think it was more, wow, we're getting more yeses than nos. There was this kind of fluidity to what we had created, that the momentum was picking up without us having to exert exponentially more effort. And to me, that's when I kind of saw that the wheels were turning, something was clicking, and we were starting to see the results. I think the hard thing about the space is that once you make an introduction for a woman for a board seat, it's not like an executive role where there's a sense of urgency all the time. And so it could be 6 months, 12 months before you actually see if there was any fruit from that introduction. And so when we first started the company, we had to operate in that world of, we know we're doing good things, we don't actually know what the outcomes are going to be yet. And so there also was a moment where we started to see some outcomes, early indicators of, wow, this is working. And so I would say, I've been started ideating 3 years ago. We've been fully at it for 2 years. To me, it was probably a little over a year in where I said, this is working, and I could do this as a side project and take another role, or another operation role, or I could really go in full force. And I think once you make a decision and you get on board, it makes it a lot easier than questioning, do I keep this as a project and do these other things I'm interested in? And I think once I made that commitment, it actually was a relief. Scary, but also a relief.
You talk about outcomes, right? And you've been talking about benchmarking, at least helping your clients identify the right metrics and how to track progress. What were your metrics that helped you determine that you were on the right path and you were getting to your outcomes to allow you to then commit to it?
Yeah, so I have to say I have an incredible team, and we started this company with data and metrics as a key part of who we are and how we run things. So we never, that wasn't a new addition, that was from day one. And there's different metrics in what we do. There's, how many women are we meeting? We have an explicit focus, not just on women, but women of color. Making sure that we are measuring our progress in terms of not only how many women of color we're meeting, but recommending for board seats. So it's really a funnel, right? It starts with how many women and introductions, and then how does that translate into board seats? And so I think coming from an operational background where metrics were such an important part of every company I've been a part of, every team I've been a part of, it seemed a little bit in the DNA. And also even just how we store data. Our favorite product is Airtable. So everything is data driven and stored in Airtable. And so that makes it a lot easier to be metrics driven. Yeah.
So that makes total sense, right? Rigor helps, right? And there's a balance, right, between you need data to be able to make informed decisions, but you don't want to be beholden to it and slow yourself down. So it looks like that was a good balance. So
it was, because I would say, when we first started, we didn't have any seated board members who we could attribute to our work. So there was a point in time, or a period of time, where we really were going not on faith completely, but we were going on kind of metrics at the top of the funnel, hoping that they spit out something at the bottom. And I think that was, nothing that you could really measure. So I agree with you that metrics are incredibly important, but you also have to listen to the people and what they're saying about the impact you're making with their, their jobs and the work that you do with them. And so that was a big part too. I mean, we work with people. And so we had those kind of data points of stories, not data, to kind of help inform what we were doing.
And I think what we do is we think of that also as an impact metric, right? Sort of it is, it helps you move further along your funnel. So to your point, they might not have been quantitative data. They were still impact metrics that you were tracking and measuring.
Yes.
Right.
I know in your operational career, you've used a lot of design techniques and design thinking. At Moves a Needle, we talk a lot about the 3 E's of going out and getting deep customer empathy, running rapid experiments with customers, and then looking at the evidence to make decisions, and kind of blending this agile mentality with design thinking and with lean startup. How has that mindset from your past world kind of infiltrated what you're doing now and helped you guys be successful?
100%. Like I often tell people, my product background is it's infinite in any problem, right? So I actually, when I first got started, I worked with a product discovery coach, Teresa Torres, who's phenomenal if you don't know her. And because the landscape was so big, and so she helps with kind of getting your tree of ideas distilled down and really taking that customer empathy feedback and turning it into a product. So I actually approached this as a product the whole time. I like to call it the world's messiest marketplace, this world of boards and word of mouth, because even the supply, which is, you know, the board ready women, the challenge isn't the pipeline, it's the visibility. And then on the demand side, the board openings are very opaque. You know, there's no job posting page for board openings. So addressing these two sides took a lot of, still takes a lot of deep understanding for those two sides and the empathy. And so I don't know, I wouldn't be sitting here with a company without those product skills that I used, you know, at OpenTable, that I used at all the roles that I've had in the past. And to me, it's just been validation that there's no real problem in the world you can't apply that thinking to.
That's awesome to hear and interesting. And I think if we look at your space, right, I think we could certainly all agree there's been a lot of progress in diversity in the workplace, but still a lot of runway left. And even looking at the list from Fortune last year of the most innovative people, I think only one was female. So given that, what advice would you give to both men and women on how to make sure that women in the workplace are getting the credit for the work that they're doing, as well as getting a seat at the table to be a decision maker?
What a great question. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of play out the data in the boardroom, only 1 in 5 public board members today is a woman. We did a study of the most highly funded venture-backed private companies where 60% of those boards are still all male. So there's a lot of conversation, but the math isn't showing up yet for women or people of color. And there's a lot of work to do. My advice is, you know, it starts with intention. I think if you have an intention to prioritize diversity, then there's a lot of ways to operationalize that intention, and it's different in different areas, right? So at the boardroom level, it's committing to things like not looking outside your own personal network. First and foremost, there's several ways to do that. Yes, him for her is one of them. There's amazingly talented executive recruiters out there, but it's also, you know, looking beyond title. So there's a kind of historical construct of a board member as a CEO or CFO. True, there are many great board members with that title, but there's a lot of need for people with operational expertise in other areas. Also, those titles are tend to take women and people of color off the table with that just one label. So, you know, broadening perspective of what a great board member can be, I think is a really great piece there. And then I think, you know, another thing that people often don't think about is bringing people into the boardroom early. I was brought into the boardroom at 28 years old to pitch an idea that ended up moving me abroad for 4.5 years. What a gift that was. And so for those leaders who have that power to invite maybe that person who owns that business unit, you know, oftentimes people say we want to keep the board meetings small. Well, actually the virtual world has opened that up a little bit, and it's a great opportunity to bring you know, some of the operators who did the work into the discussion. It's also a great opportunity for those operators to see the boardroom dynamic, which is much harder to do sometimes at larger companies, for example.
Jocelyn, I recall very vividly the first time I met you. The one thing you mentioned was that for us to get gender equality, it is very important to include both genders in the process, right? And yes, I agree. The nature of what you do forces that somewhat, because most of the people in boardrooms are males. So can you share more about why you believe that's the case, how it has helped you, right? And last but not least, how do you strike that balance where men are engaged, but then women feel empowered and not overwhelmed?
Yeah, great question. So, how did I come to that? It's my lived experience. So, my career in technology, I've worked exclusively for and with men. I've been given a lot of opportunities to work with men. I've had a lot of open doors open for me by male sponsors. And so it was very much a lived experience. And then when I did the research, I learned what you just said out loud, right? Which is that almost all the board members are men. And then I credit it to the product discovery, right? If I had to go to those people and talk to them, over and over and over to really understand how they think about this. And when I learned, wow, they're all trying to help and they don't know how. And then I learned how they were doing it today. It became pretty clear to me that, wow, if we just extended the networks, the system would start to work better for everybody. So that's really how I came up with it.
How do we ensure that it just doesn't become an exercise in checking the box, and people truly embrace it to drive impact?
I think part of it is understanding why we're doing it. We actually aren't doing it to check the box. We're doing it because it makes for better businesses and it makes for better products and services. And there's countless data. We could do a separate podcast on all the different studies that have come out and shared the economic benefits. But when I mentioned the social benefits, what's increasingly coming out are those studies, right? Is that boards that have more diversity make better decisions for the environment, that safer products are in market, whether that's more recalls of unsafe products. So there's a lot of profound impact, and obviously you can't be what you can't see. So I think employees and consumers increasingly will start to look at boards to understand, do they represent the customer base? And if you've ever been a part of a group who makes decisions, you can see the difference between a group that looks alike, thinks alike. They often will fall into groupthink, which quite honestly is riskier for a business than one that has healthy dissenting opinions to see around corners that you couldn't see around, which is where some of those wider definitions of non-CEO and CFO, it's really diversity across many lenses. Industry diversity, cultural diversity, age diversity, all of these things are better for better decisions. And so I think, how do we make sure it's not a box that's checked? I think it's getting a better understanding of why it's better for the business on every level.
And does him for her also work with organizations to ensure that this sort of trickles down? Can you tell us more about?
Today, we're focused exclusively on the boardroom. What I will say is that does have trickle-down effects. I mean, I have a story of one board member we placed. She was the first woman on the board, and her first task was to take a look at their DEI strategy, right? So I think, while as an organization, we're really focused on what is an enormous opportunity in terms of, as you said, with the math, we're far from where we want to be. Every board member that gets that seat has a powerful kind of trickle down impact waiting for them.
Well, that is awesome. It is wonderful to hear that starting at the top, the trickle down starts to address those large structural issues that, to your point, absolutely need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Right?
So shifting gears a little bit, we know that you have a passion for food and had worked at OpenTable, which is one of my favorite apps. I don't know if I'm double secret platinum or what, but we get a lot of points there. I'm wondering, and you talk about the power of breaking bread together and having meals together. And I think we've all experienced that. Do you have maybe one story you could pull out of your repository from your either time at OpenTable or what you're doing now that just sticks out as wow, that was so cool or such a powerful time over dinner.
Yeah, I mean, I think one that stands out to me was when I was working at OpenTable, I had the privilege to go to Japan. And that is a place where, you know, it's if you land and you don't speak the language, can be kind of intimidating in terms of how are you going to communicate with people. And I had also just found out that I was pregnant. And I remember specifically going to a sushi restaurant, and in the United States, that's something that, you know, there's a lot of people that say, you know, don't eat sushi. And I didn't know what to do because I was with one of our leaders there. I was, you know, being taken to this amazing restaurant. So I just remember being online beforehand and saying, you know, what should I do? What should I do? And I got to the restaurant, and our contact there was like, well, you know, what do you think the women over here eat when they're pregnant? And I was like, wow, that's an interesting point. So that was one of the more memorable trips in terms of breaking bread and being able to talk about the business with a shared language of food.
Another question for you related to dining, and I don't know if you have a bucket list on this or not, but if you were to think about two people you haven't had dinner with, and this could be dead or alive, right? Who would you love to have dinner with at some point in your life?
So I think just given the timing, well, gosh, I have three answers. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I was recently on, I watched a webinar where Madeleine Albright was speaking, and she talked about the importance of generational learning from people older than you and learning from people younger than you. So when I thought about this question, I thought about that, like, who are those people? And Madeleine is one of them for sure, but so is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so those would be my two in the generation above me. And then I started thinking about the generation below. I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. She's such an interesting and evolved creative. And I think given the topic of women and our progress or our lack of progress, I think that would be a really fascinating dinner table.
Yeah, bring all three together, right?
Yeah. So if you guys could just arrange that as part of this podcast, that would be great.
We're on it.
Yeah,
Totally
that's
on
good.
it.
And it'll be in Japan with sushi, of course. One kind of quirky question for you. What is the most unusual thing you have on your desk or within reach there in your office?
Okay, so I didn't do any kind of configuration. So my desk is very small, but I do have this that I keep, and it is, you can't read it. But what it is at our 36 dinners, one of the questions we asked is, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? And we had the privilege of hearing that answered by hundreds of CEOs, board members, and executives. And we went through those dinners are off the record, but we keep notes, and we went through and made a transcript of all the answers, and I keep that on my desk because there are some really good ones. And when you're having a good or a bad day, it's a great thing to kind of look at and read.
What would you tell your 20-year self?
I'm reading them. I've come up with a unique one, or you want me to pick one of these that I resonate with?
It'd be great if you can share with us what you would tell your 20-year-old self.
What would I tell my 20-year-old self? I think I would tell my 20-year-old self to follow your passion and care less about what others think of the journey.
Great advice.
And that is very poignant and profound. So.
Yeah, I think we see that over and over again in the innovation work we do. Is fear tends to be the enemy of big ideas actually getting to market, or actually somebody's personal life actually taking that next leap.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like you mentioned, I think, yes, perfect is the enemy of good, and so is fear, right? Sort of.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Before we wrap, I'd like to remind you about our special offer. Go to the link on your screen and you can register for 30 minutes of free coaching with our expert innovation coaches at Moves the Needle. There's no better time than now to help your organization drive impact in these times of uncertainty.